All right. So in this example, guys, exact same process. But the thing I want to confirm with you is I'm just seeing some like common mistakes and but nothing private. But I want you guys to understand this looks very similar to the last round that we did, right? Very similar, same kind of numbers, but we recognize these are quadratics, right? And this process we're going to be solving using the square root method, basically using our inverse operations. We don't need to factor or do anything crazy here. But again, our whole idea is to solve for x. Now, again, understanding this reverse order of operations. We can't undo subtraction and multiplication until we undo the squaring, right? Because remember, PEMDAS is like parentheses, exponents, right? And then multiplication, division, add, check. We're working our way backwards. But we got to undo, before we can do that, we got to undo the squaring because that's all inside these parentheses. So we got to get rid of these parentheses before we can undo this. So how do we undo squaring? Yeah? Right. So how would I undo the squaring, though? You're right. So how would I, what? Yeah, you're going to square root, right? Square root and squaring are inverse operations. Now, did I just introduce a square root symbol? Yes, I introduced it. So you'll get really annoyed for me saying this every time, because whenever you introduce the square root, you have to include plus or minus. Because if I give you a random equation, like x squared is equal to 4, you know that negative 2 squared is 4 and positive 2 squared is 4. So you don't really know which answer is which, right? If I say x squared is equal to 4, what's x? You don't really know if it's negative 2 or positive 2, correct? So whenever we introduce the square root, we need to make sure we include both positive and negative solutions. And that's one of the more common mistakes that happens. And again, that's a very important thing that's going to happen for the rest of the year. So don't just think it's an isolated incident. Now, we have 3x minus 1. For the sake of doing problems fast, I'm going to add the 1 and then divide by the 3. So I get 1 plus or minus the square root of y divided by 3 equals x. All right. If you have, I'm just doing multiple steps in my head to them so we can get through the rest of these problems. All right. But hopefully you guys at least understand this portion. And then here, all I did was add a 1. I put the 1 in front because typically we like 1 plus or minus instead of plus or minus square root of y plus 1. So I just put it in front and then divide by 3. All right. But if you have trouble with this, just let me know as I'm walking around. But the main important thing I want to see here is before we can undo the square root, we have to undo this multiplication. All right? Because again, we want to get to the inside. We want to get rid of those parentheses. Right? So we need to get rid of that function, that squaring. But you just do not just take the square root here, because we can't. We got to get rid of this 3. We've got to undo this inverse operation. The other way I like to say it is, if you're going to undo the square root, you got to make sure it's isolated. Isolate this term. So therefore, I'm going to divide by 3. Therefore, I'm left y minus 3 is equal to x minus 1 squared. Now I can square root both sides. So therefore, I have plus or minus the square root of y over 3 equals x minus 1. And then I'll just write my answer. Looks something like that. And then in the last example, now you can see that I have just the 3x there is grouping, right? So now what I need to do to solve this, I need to get rid of this 1. I don't want to take the square root, guys, because you can't distribute that square root across those two terms, right? If you're going to undo the squaring, you want to have that term isolated. Does that make sense? So therefore, I'll add a 1. Y plus 1 is equal to 3x squared. Now I can introduce the square root. Make sure you do plus or minus. And then I could divide by 3. And therefore, I could have plus or minus y plus 1 is equal to x. Or could I also do this? Oops, sorry. Are those the same thing? Yes, right? That immediately your brain just to be like, that shouldn't. Don't get confused. Oh, divide by 3 or multiply by 1/3. Very common that you'll get this as the answer, right? But that's the answer choice on a multiple choice problem, right? Like obviously both those are right. Whatever you want to do it for me is fine. Just make sure you remember that those are always right. Dividing by a number, same as multiplying by the reciprocal, right? So we're improved upon that. All right, guys, we're not done yet. You thought you were done, but you're not.